Thank you, Francesco.
Wow.
Welcome to our couch conversation, everybody. And I just really want to thank my my couch mates here, Riel and Pupul, who've agreed to save me from a half hour of monologue. And I really appreciate that. I'd also just like to thank Miguel and thank you. I also want to just thank Miguel and Fran for, I guess, convening this idea of the Global Foresight Summit. I thought it was really cool and an amazing feat to pull off on such short notice. I guess many people are doing this, but I was very encouraged by its inclusive nature, and I was very encouraged by Pupul and Riel for agreeing also on short notice to come on board with this on a Saturday morning, no less. I think it's afternoon for Pupul. And the idea here is to have a chat. It's to have a chat about us as futurists in different places. Riel, I think, needs no introduction. You've probably heard him earlier in the summit. We know him obviously from, well, mainly from UNESCO right now, but mainly I think as a leading thinker and pioneer in the space of futures literacy, the disciplines of anticipation, and just really getting us to think differently about this field of foresight. So thank you very much, Riel, for taking up the call.
For sure.
And then Pupul, who I know less, but I'm really looking forward to know a lot more about. I first encountered you around 2018, where actually both Riel and I are part of the panel on the Next Generation Foresight Practitioners Awards. And those of you who don't know about that, I'm sure can go to any of our LinkedIn pages and find a link for the current call. So please do get young people going from that. And I'm hoping you'll tell us a little bit about maybe how that might have impacted on your trajectory. So thank you both. But the point of this is not monologue, it's for us to have a chat. And I had sent you each a couple of just lead questions, and I thought we'd get right into it, right? Mm-hmm. So the first one is the easy one. It's the kind of, why are you even, I'm gonna use this word futurist to describe us. I know we don't always all use it to describe ourselves, but why did you get interested in futures in the first place? Why did you become a futurist? Riel, maybe I'll give you a bit of time to think about it. I know it's really far back for you. People, maybe you want to come in first. So just like, what got you into this?
So my creative journey began in design. That's my background. And I was studying at National Institute of Design in India. And while I was studying there, I think I got a taste of the kind of impact that design can have on the world. And then I realized that I and my peers largely were unaware of it or ignorant of it. So soon after I got out of grad school, I realized that if I want to deepen my design practice and really apply it to making a difference and contribute meaningfully to the world around me, I needed to give myself an opportunity to sort of expand my horizons, no pun intended, and learn skills that make me understand the contexts in which I design, as well as people for whom I design, and the entire life cycle of what happens after I design. So I was very hungry for that kind of learning, which took me across, as in India we say, across the 7 seas to the North American continent. And I went to OCAD University in Toronto and did my master's in strategic foresight and innovation. And if I'm being absolutely honest, up until the point I found myself in grad school, I did not know that somebody can have a job title that says futurist, or that there is an entire profession of foresight. So that's really how I got into this work.
So Pupul was crossing 7 seas to Canada, which is where Riel hails from. Riel, yes. Same question to you, but maybe also in your case, maybe also asking about inflection points. Was there some crossroads where you came from one school of thinking about the future to another, or have you always been this crazy guy?
Well, no, I've probably always been the crazy guy, but thank you, Geci, for the question, and Pupul for that explanation of your voyage. I think it has the same basic contours, of course, discovery and like you say, Geci, inflection points. I guess I'll just pay tribute to a little article I read this morning about Max Weber and a speech he gave in 1917 about the nature of the university. And the discussion that was going on at that time about the relationship of ideas and thinking and reflection to the world around us. And at that point in time, Max Weber was somebody who noted that thinking had sort of, I guess, lost an element related to what he was calling enchantment and what others might call mystery. And being confined at home has some of the advantages of pushing me into books that, you know, have been sitting on my shelves and looking at them and pulling them out. And so Antonio Gramsci, who some people may know as a communist leader in the interwar period, wrote from prison, Mussolini prison, about organic intellectuals, which has some echoes, but still had a very vanguardist flavor to it. And so I guess the origins of my crazy voyage, as it were, was a rejection in some senses of revolution and an embracing of enchantment. And that's meant being uncomfortable in a way that I think is always a good sign. When I'm comfortable, I think, ooh, ooh, and that's actually from the Grateful Dead. When life looks like easy street, there's danger at your door. And that's a line from the Grateful Dead. So those are kind of the mix of ingredients that pushed me along. The turning point, and I just happened to talk to the fellow who really made the decisive move just yesterday, a fellow named Charles Pascal, who lives in Ontario and who is an emeritus professor at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. Charles hired me in 1988 to run a large exercise called the Future of the Community College System in Ontario, called Vision 2000. And that was the moment when I really became acutely aware of something that had been kind of itching inside my brain about forecasts, since I was trained as an economist, and forecasting was the par excellence technocratic métier, skill, trade of our time. And I became more and more disenchanted with that in a very explicit way. And it helped me look for alternatives. And that really started me on the multi-dimensional exploration of the relationship of our imagination and our volition, our fears and our hopes to the world around us. And this desire to not abandon the mystery at the same time as being able to make sense of the world around me. So I'll stop there.
That's very cool. And actually we'll come back to this because, I mean, I'd like to say a little bit about my journey, but maybe I'd like to link it to when we come back to talking about what these ideas mean, you know, what this mystery means now, right? Because we're in quite particular times. I mean, this conference, I suppose, is a recognition of that. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how these ideas, now different ways of thinking about the future, resonate now. There's a lot of focus on futurists, and I wanted us to link this to our times. I've asked both of you actually to just share with us a bit of a sense. You know, we're sitting on 3 different continents. I think that's partly what's cool about the panel. Maybe let's just talk a little bit about now. So where are you currently, physically? And what does it feel like for you right now? What's literally going on where you are, and what's your reading of it? So I'm going to ask maybe Pupul if you would go first. Uriel will go and I'll also go. But yeah, we're just going to share some images with our participants and just a sense of, well, what sense you're making of what's going on where you are. You're on mute, Pupul.
Sorry about that. Before I share the images, so I am in New Delhi, India, which is the city where I grew up. This is where my parents still live, so home is very much here. I've been in Canada the past 3.5 years. But actually, without anticipating the pandemic, I ended up coming home for a month because I hadn't experienced the Indian Spring in over 4 years. It's my favorite time of the year in India. And as it so happened, I came to India and it's a blooming, beautiful spring outside, but we're in a lockdown, which I think is a beautiful metaphor for the kind of times that we're living in. So you had asked us, Geci, which I thought was really interesting, to actually, picture, speak 1,000 words and use images to talk about what it feels like from where we are. And so I thought that there are these two images that I found, which I thought would be, can you all see it? Can you see my screen? Okay. So this is the first one, and I believe this is from the first day that total lockdown was announced. We had Janta curfew, which means public curfew, civil curfew, and then my city, Delhi, announced a total lockdown, and right after that, following that, the central government announced a total lockdown of the entire country. Wow. And all of this transpired in a couple of days, and I think up until then, people did not even understand or were grasping or were given the means to really digest the gravity of the situation that we're in. So it was a bit jerky. It was very, very jarring in terms of information coming down to the local public. And this image is actually of hordes and hordes of migrant workers from all over India, particularly from rural North India, who work in Delhi, and a lot of them are daily wage earners. And once a lockdown is announced, of course, there's panic, there's fear, but there's also this reality of what happens to someone who's living on a day-to-day basis. They lose their jobs, and then resources become a question. And there wasn't necessarily a communication regarding that at the time that the lockdown was announced. So these are all these people somehow trying to get back home, and borders were sealed. So a lot of them actually braved journeys of several hundred kilometers by foot because they did not know what other option they would have. And the reason why I chose to talk about this image is because I think it, as a systems designer, I'll speak from a macro perspective first, it appeals to me because I think language is very important. And a lot of what I'm reading is this constant narrative of this being a fight of nations against the virus, and just this war terminology. I think we need to get out of this. This is a systemic crisis or a failure in a lot of senses, and it is a public health crisis. So it's a crisis of public goods, of common goods, and the lack of it in our systems. It also captures the complexity of tackling with such a crisis in a country like India. We are not a China, we're not a South Korea, neither are we a New Zealand or a US, right? So it speaks to something that's a core part of my work, is why context is important when we talk about action, why context matters in policy making above all. And when we don't think about that context, who gets left behind? I think we all have felt extremely frustrated in the past few days, but it's also been a time for us to realize and just acknowledge the kind of privilege that we have despite our frustrations and challenges, and then who truly is bearing the brunt of it, to the point where it's not just this that is a matter of life and death, but something like this too can, it is a question of that for people. And then the last thing I want to talk about on this image is that even though this is a global pandemic, we're all in this together, like everything else in our world and life, there is no singular experience of COVID. There are diverse experiences, and we need to think about all of them and speak to all of them. And then very quickly, less than 30 seconds, if I can share another image, very different tone. But again, thinking as a futurist, we always talk about artifacts from the future. This time that we're in really feels like this future that we all maybe spoke about and anticipated arrived overnight almost. And then I feel like these are some really fascinating artifacts from this future that we're living in. This is actually a local police if I'm not wrong, southern India. They have reinterpreted the COVID structure, the structure of the virus, both as a protective gear, but also because they realize that they're tasked with this lockdown and the responsibility of keeping millions of population that needs to feed itself, that does not have the means and is probably illiterate and has not been given any sort of awareness and education. So the police takes it upon themselves to engage through storytelling and creativity and art to impart that awareness in people, because then you know that it's the prerequisite to be implementing or enforcing something like a lockdown, which is important right now. And that it also highlights that in difficult times like this, our greatest power as humans is humor and creativity, and we can lean on it, even on such times. Okay, I'm done.
Very cool, very cool. Love the images. So Riel, you were going to go next, but actually I'm wondering if I should, because I think mine maybe are a bit of continuity with Pupul. So I'll just flick over to those. Just give me a quick second. I just now need to reorganize them because I had them in a different order. Okay, here we go. So I'm now going to share my screen and just talk about the view of things from here. And I also chose to have two images. I don't know what you guys can see. Can you see that? Okay, cool. So, so this was one of my two images, and mine are both similar and speak to some of the points I think, Pupul, you're raising about context. This was a photo that came out of the Daily Maverick, one of our dailies here, and it's an image that was captioned, you know, African immigrants on, you know, who sleep on the sidewalk, and a COVID poster. And it occurred to me, you know, so what was different 2 months ago for these people and now? And the only difference really is the poster, right? That fence was there. They were sleeping exactly on that ground, and their relationship to South Africa, where we are sitting, is very similar to what it is now. So really nothing has changed for some people. And I think that's an important reminder. And there's a lot going on here that's got to do with South Africa's inequality. You know, we're sort of this renowned or infamous, you know, most unequal country in the world. India is not too far behind, by the way, which is not a great thing, but that's partly what this shows up, right? Is the world we live in, and the fact that unfortunately in times like this, the sense of crisis perhaps is also not experienced in quite the same way. You know, the horror some of us are, you know, now completely engrossed in is simply an ongoing horror for so many people. Yeah, so in fact, for these people, very little difference. The second image I had was another group of people for whom there's a lot of difference, actually. So we have a very large informal economy. And in fact, South Africa's is smaller than India's and than many other African countries, but we still have a significant and a growing informal economy in different economic times. And partly what the COVID disaster response and the lockdowns and all of that have meant is a serious impact, and also this kind of imbalanced response by policymakers to what, you know, economic hardship and rescue means, right? Because there's been a lot of attention on about corporates, you know, how do we create new store hours? How do we create, you know, some sort of responses, whether it's for retail or other people who are impacted on by COVID and this, you know, economic impact, but that really didn't initially consider the informal sector. Even when I think only a week and a half ago, we began to have a response to the sector, it completely demonstrated a misunderstanding of what the sector does and what spaces it functions in. So for example, the fact that street food is a very big part of it. And they were completely excluded actually from the interventions that were made, because I guess, I wouldn't say it's not visible because it's very visible here, but it was invisible to policymaking. For some reason. So again, what factors or variables one looks at and how one thinks about response. I like the little sign in the front. This is also from a newspaper, but this idea that it's money And that's still the focus, right? So when we think about economy, it's still in very kind of financialized terms, and that's the only term we seem to be able to think in. So anyway, I chose these two images only because I think to me they're indicative about if we continue to think about crisis and the future in the way we've thought in the past and behaved in the past, then I think we can expect, at least in terms of policy response, very little that would be different to how we've tended to behave and how we've tended to react and respond to things. And so the future may change, but not through our action. I think we're quite predictable in terms of, at least in our space, how we've tended. And so when now people begin to speak about new economies and new imaginaries, I'm not sure how much is new in the way they're framing that. And I think we'll come back to this when we talk about our role and some of the areas I think that these particular practitioners, you are pushing for. I think it really is the time for them, but we'll come back to this. I'm going to go to the next image, and I'm going to invite Riel back in. So Riel, tell us about how you see things from where you sit.
Well, I mean, from the point of view of place, and so there's the Eiffel Tower behind my shoulder. So I'm in Paris, and in a sense, the pinnacle of privilege, and the also the perhaps in some senses the apogee of monumentalism. The image that I put there, the tree is a tree that's since the confinement started, it had no leaves at the beginning, and now it's blossoming and showing life anew. Maybe metaphorically, that's kind of an easy image to think about for this moment in time where there's a bleakness to the decline and the simple dysfunctionality that it just doesn't work. I mean, the images that you both showed are systems that are just dysfunctional. They don't create lives that people want to lead. They don't give meaning. They don't respect what it means to be alive. And so, this pandemic shock, which is revelatory because it precisely illustrates the lack of public goods, the inattention to public goods, the failure to adapt the nature of public goods to different contexts. In other words, the monolithic, monumentalist construction of monuments like this Eiffel Tower or other symbols of power, it in some ways strips them bare. It takes the clothes, it makes it clear that the emperor has no clothes. Yet at the same time, I think you're right, Geci, that there's a huge inertia to the system and the reproduction and human habit and our desire to, to be, maybe it's simply to reduce the cost of being alive. In other words, it takes huge energy to deal with anxiety, to deal with hope, to continuously find hope around us from almost anywhere that you sit. I mean, this is something that's doesn't respect status and class. Money can't buy love. I mean, it's the old refrain. That's a Beatles one, right? But it's something that I think comes to the forefront in the context that we're in. As Pupo says, it draws our attention to context. As you say, it draws our attention to this kind of inability to see what's around us, like you said about the street vendors, and understand value. I said in the context of a United Nations discussion, well, work in the home has no accounting framework, has no way of being valued. What do we see it as now? We see it as something that has no value. How do we create systems where that has some value? And it's not necessarily monetary, but a recognition of the interdependencies and how we depend on each other, and therefore, again, on collective and public goods. So it's a fascinating moment. And it's easy for me to say fascinating because of where I sit. And I appreciate that privilege every day.
I think many of us are hopefully starting to. So, okay, I'm just gonna, did I already unshare screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. I can't really tell from my side. Okay, so I think this is a good segue into the next part of our conversation, which, and in a way, really, have already began taking us into that, is what this all means to us. So we are so-called futurists, and so we're supposedly useful, right? And I'm sure a lot of people are looking to us right now. I think a year ago, I guess we were all worried about the planet being at risk from us, the bad Anthropocene. Today, we are now worried about being the ones at risk from biological factors and that sort of thing. I'm just wondering, so there've been a lot of futurist reactions. I've seen a lot of them online. I'm sure you have as well. And the ones I've seen have ranged from people saying we foresaw this, or people saying that, okay, this is the time to really think about the future, and different ideas about how we do that. I'm curious about whether you feel any particular professional responsibility in times like this. And do you think do you think you have an important role to play at this time? And I mean that personally and professionally, I suppose. And either of you can go first. I don't know. So here we are.
Well, I'll take a quick one at that. In fact, actually, when the whole thing kind of started to become evident as a pandemic, meaning that it escaped its point of origin, and it became clear that it was contagious, and that there was a requirement for a global response, in effect. I had a pretty strong sense of malaise at a personal level. It was difficult. I had trouble sleeping. I would wake up in the morning with about 6 different ideas in my head. And I knew that I needed to write some things just to express them. But not from the point of view that I had something that I think would be particularly helpful to the world. Because I've long ago, very, very long ago, abandoned this notion of the role of heroic acts and the false narrative, the delusional and probably pathological narrative about success and popularity and impact and all that stuff. But rather to just see if I could find a way to articulate what I was feeling on the basis of my experience, which is now kind of fairly long for human standards. And there I have to say, and let me just, I was trying to think of moments when there were kind of, when human volition, agency, did make a difference. And for me, there's not all that many moments really, because I don't consider most of the interventions and acts to have been significant in the sense of moving history or changing history. The role of the individual in history, in my view, is very, very minimal. We're expressions of contextual, and they're elements that might be accelerated or deaccelerated. But here I was thinking of reading and writing. It seems to me that the bizarre, complex, emergent phenomenon that's called reading and writing. So you have to invent writing. You have to figure out systems for diffusing it. You have to make it politically acceptable from a power perspective. And then you have to give all these people, as many as possible in the current context, not enough, obviously, the ability to do this. Giving humans an ability, like let's say giving them the ability to do a ritual. So building a temple, so you can go and do the ritual in the temple. Creating the context, creating the ability to do something like reading and writing seems to me to be relatively unique in human history. In other words, it's a universal, more or less, capability with let's say, some significant destructive attributes for societies and civilizations that are not written. So that's an important thing for us to keep in mind. But be that as it may, reading and writing is something that's relatively universal and covers all of humanity and changes what we can do. It opens up. it's par excellence the example of a competency-based approach, a capability-based approach to dealing with our freedom. And today it seems to me, and Melissa, you'll know where I'm going, that our ability to understand shocks like the pandemic shock, and frankly, we live in a universe which will always provide shocks. The vanity and here almost insane arrogance of thinking we can somehow preempt shocks in a creative universe like ours, is a sign of the dysfunction that that we can see around us. The idea of being able to better understand the relationship of our imagination, our ability to imagine, to the world around us, in the same way that our ability to see and to write and to read and to be able to store in cognitive form something we've read and then to make sense of it and to share it. So the ability and capacity of reading and writing seems to me to be an example in the history of humanity that now, with this shock, we are once again confronted with an opportunity to underscore when your image of the future changes. And bang, the pandemic changes our image of the future. Our perception of the present changes. So here's a moment when we can reinforce the message that if you don't understand, if you're not able to have power with respect to your own imagination, you cannot live in a way that allows you to understand the world, the universe you live in. This is fundamental. Cognitive dissonance, pathologies of all kinds arise from the fact that if we live in this universe and we don't understand how our imagination functions, and therefore our relationship to hopes and fears that we manufacture in our heads, then we're really at a very significant, I would say, loss, poverty of the imagination, if you want to call it that, in today's world. So what came to me was that, wow, okay, here's a nice illustration of something that's really worth pushing as an idea to share with everyone who's been working in this area, but everybody as well. So everybody's having this experience. Your imagination changes, and you see that it changes your perception of the present. Don't you understand how fundamental understanding your imagination is to understanding the world that you're actually functioning in, what you see and what you do?
Absolutely. And I want to come back to this, Riel, because at the end, I'd like to give each of you just a couple of minutes to talk about your own work. And I know a lot of your work has to do with this idea of futures literacy, and that's so important. Pupul, you talk a lot about decolonizing in your own work, and I know that's a term you also use. But maybe swinging around to you on this same question, I'm going to post up an article that you and I know both read and both liked and both resonated with this last paragraphs of it, which I've just posted up. It's an article by your fellow countrywoman, Arundhati Roy. You're in very good company out there. Like, such amazing writers coming out of India. I just love it. Such wisdoms. But, this is the last paragraph in an article she put out about a week ago. And she talks about, this idea of walking out with imagination, to speak to Riel's point, and your work, I think, in design and some of the comments you've made. What's your feeling? What do you think as a futurist and as a person in these times? What comes to mind in terms of your role?
It's fascinating you said as a futurist, as a person, because I feel like up until this point, every single professional experience and action that I undertook came from a very, very personal point. So I always saw my personal identity and my professional identity as extremely intertwined. And that of a futurist in the past 2 years since I won the NGFP award became even more closely tied. For the first time when the pandemic hit, I experienced that disconnect of Pupul as a person of a certain age and generation in a country like India, a daughter, all my relations, where I stand in the world, and then my identity as a futurist. For a few days, I could not think as a futurist. And to have empathy for ourselves, again, I'm coming from a place of privilege wherein I am not a front line responder in this crisis. I guess those people don't have the privilege to respect that disconnect. But then what we can learn from our own experience is honor the humanity in even the frontline responders, because this is a difficult time for all of us, irrespective of how much we're trained and practiced in singing and dancing with uncertainty. And then when you respond to it at a human individual level, then you start reflecting, then you start drawing on your learnings, on whatever knowledge, experience you've accumulated given your professional background. And even then, I feel that going back to what you were saying about that a lot is being written and said, I really agree with Riel. I think it's important for us to document this time in our history so that we don't forget these experiences. So it's important to write. Even oral transmission is important given, some other cultures of the world. And so that conversation is important. To put it out there, have that dialogue is important. But I think a lot of what is being written is also about, this is what the future is. They're very prescriptive, and I feel like they're jumping the gun in a lot of ways. And all I see in those pieces is hubris, hubris, hubris. I mean, we're not thinking beyond the limitations of what our past tells us is possible. And I think that connects to what decolonization fundamentally is to not let your imagination be limited by what history has been like. And that people who've been left out in the history do not need to keep on being left out of the present and the future. And making room for those marginalized histories, marginalized knowledge systems, marginalized ways of knowing, being, and doing into the mainstream, both as a way of giving space and respect, but also having the humility to learn. I think a personal position that I have taken for myself in the past 2 weeks is I decided that, I think Riel spoke about this right at the beginning, I do see a lot of benefit, creative benefit and value in sitting in discomfort, because it teaches you a lot. And right now, I think one job that I can do is sit in this discomfort and be an active listener and observe as keenly and as deeply as I can, because what I learned right now will help me fulfill my role and job as a futurist when the time is right, in due course. So, and then my immediate role that I see for myself as a futurist is a lot of anxiety that I'm hearing from my personal circles and even out in the world is suddenly time horizons are shortened, which already were, but even more so now. People don't know how to think beyond the next week, or for some people, the next hour and the next day. And as a futurist, I feel like I am equipped with the techniques or prompts, or I use storytelling a lot, for example, in my work, to be that facilitator right now and help people, slowly and comfortably start playing with the idea of, again, unlocking their horizon and expanding them in a way that feels organic and respectful of the time that we're in. So I am really thinking of my role as a facilitator, of somebody who can encourage people and engage them in a conversation about the future. I think that is the most difficult thing for a lot of people right now, is to even acknowledge that there's a future beyond this. And where do we even begin thinking about it? That's where futurists can come in, because we know where to begin and how to move forward from there, and how to keep those conversations constructive.
Right. I think that's so important, this idea of facilitating. And I'm going to maybe just, I mentioned earlier, I'll say a little bit about my journey, but I actually want to use it to come back both to Riel, you speaking about the futures literacy piece, and Pupul, maybe you talking about some of the way you practice and this art of facilitating. And I know you use a lot of storytelling in your work as part of that. So my journey in so-called, futuring began maybe like 20 years ago in what I'd call very traditional foresight. And a lot of that, and I'm seeing a resurgence in a call for this maybe over the past year and maybe more so now, was around wanting to have plans and answers and strategies for the future, for dealing with the future, right? So it was about coming up with answers from the future. And we supposedly had the tools now to do that. And as a good, well-trained urban planner, This was good news for me because obviously the more certainty I could carve out into the future, then the more useful the work we were doing was, and the more certainty we could give to governments who we were working with, or clients, corporations, whomever. And I did that kind of work for a long time. And the thing is, and so my own sort of divergence, and part of that actually intersected with meeting Riel and some of his ideas, was realizing, you use the word hubris, Pupul, you begin to, just you come apart a little bit when you begin to realize that actually, I wouldn't go so far as to call it bullshit, but there's a really strong bullshit element in that, right? Because you've got the methodologies to do something, but of course, the one thing we don't know anything about is the future. And Riel talks a lot about that. And so we can do the preparation, we can do the planning, we can extend the time horizon of the tools, but we don't necessarily extend the time horizon of our knowledge. And we also can talk about things like how we expand imagination, but if we contain them in the same methods, in the same frames of thinking, if we don't question how we are thinking fundamentally, I think one begins to realize that we simply reproduce the same things in different colors, in different scales, in different hues. And I began to feel probably a few years ago that that's what I was doing. Mm-hmm. So even now, what's really interesting is I'm reading a lot of articles about imagination and the need to reimagine. And many of us are getting very comfortable with using that term. But often I feel that if we're not careful, it's coming in very similar packaging. It's reimagining so that we can come up with the new bold solutions that are reimagined. And that's going to make for a better future. And so this idea that we can still sell the good future if we just think about it differently than we did before. And I think that's really something that's come apart for me a little bit. And in times like this, I worry that if what we're going to revert to, so I've been in conversations the last few days about, okay, great time to be talking about new economy. Mm-hmm. But then as soon as you get into the conversation again, people are asking, okay, so what are the answers? How is the new economy going to deal with inclusion? And do you have the 3 strategies we're going to use for that? So again, sort of trying to, not questioning why we think about things in that way. So Riel, maybe this is a good segue to how you respond to everybody saying this is a great time for us to do something different, something new. How do we do that? Because are we not possibly exactly at the peak of continuing to do what we've been doing? And that's my big fear.
Yeah. No, excellent. We're very well framed. Obviously panic and defensiveness and the kind of the easy story of destruction. I mean, it's easy to end things in a way just because you just remove them. So death is this kind of really easy thing to think about. Birth, on the other hand, is an event we can identify, but the implications when a baby is born, as Grandmaster Flash would say. And so the issue here, I think, is taking this moment, which I think is a moment that is full of certain ends. Things have been, let's put it this way, paused, suspended. To take that moment, not to kind of project their replacement or project their the resuscitation, oftentimes as zombies, living dead, but to really say, what am I noticing that's different around me? And do that with, how can I put it, generosity. In the following sense, not knowing whether it's important or not knowing whether it's essential or fundamental, not saying, aha, this is the seed of the great oak tree that will grow into capitalism, and then cause shade and everything else under it will die. No, you just say, hey, it's a little seed. It's a little seed of an idea which says, because I'm doing this virtually now, all of a sudden there's something that maybe I need to do because the virtual is allowing the 3 of us to be together, and then with all these other people, hey, that's unbelievable. We wouldn't have done that a few weeks ago, but it's missing something. There's things that I don't, that it's not enough of it. How can I make it more? And not, instead of projecting this forward as some sort of systemic solution or new product to conquer the world, to resist our scale economy reflexes. Scale is success. If I have 1 million hits, I'm a famous and important person. To resist our scale economy effects, to resist our narrative storytelling instincts, which is to run this out as the story of the little baby that becomes the king, the prince and the pauper or something. I mean, it's to say, no, just appreciate the present because we have a gift here. We have suspended our images of the future. And in that respect, I would really encourage futurists to stop creating scenarios of the future. Scenarios of the future are, in the current context, actually a distraction and exacerbate the pathologies. Right now is a moment to really say, given that I'm daydreaming, not planning, not probable, not desirable, I'm in a dream space. How does the dream state allow us to see the present, live the present, appreciate the present differently? That's experimentalism. And that experimentalism has the potential to really make things different in the future. And in that sense, this will incorporate the point that you've heard me make before, our greatest legacy is what we do now, how we express our values now. Because it's not that I should live forever and impose myself on the future, but that I understand that I'm going to die. And what my death implies is, how have I lived? And that's our legacy.
Amazing, amazing. So now we're provoked to abandon scenarios. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Pupul, you've got ideas. You've been doing something different. Maybe just your thoughts about your practice and how you've been thinking about this.
Yeah. So I think my practice came from the place of realizing, like you said, Geci, it's also about the tools that we use to imagine the future. And a lot of times there's this false sense of universality that's accorded to our methods, and we feel like they are relevant for everyone, for every kind of exploration of the future, and that there isn't an option beyond that. And I realized studying futures that as someone coming from a previously colonized geography, but living in a globalized world, that my identity is hybrid, but parts of my identity that are shaped by my socio-cultural upbringing in India were being silenced in the way that I was having to practice futures. And that's what really inspired me to create. I started asking these questions of, what if there was another way to do foresight? And what if, storytelling in itself could become a tool for decolonizing the way we explore futures and imagine futures? Because I truly believe that futures for all cannot be imagined by a few. So if we're talking about decolonized futures, the process through which we imagine those futures has to be decolonized as well. So it's not just about what future, but who is imagining that future and who's getting to tell that story. So that voice is also very important. Platform and space is very important. And so Riel said that this will be our legacy, right? So in my method, I look at, and then against scenarios, in my method, I don't think futures thinking and imagining futures is about that destination of whatever P future looks like. It's about a collective journey. And the fact that it's collective has become more obvious than ever before right now. We're not in this by ourselves. It is collective. And so I treat in my work future as this collective journey of communities who've perhaps never had the opportunity to ask themselves what is the kind of future that we're moving towards versus what is the kind of future that we would like to live in. But these are the people who will ultimately be the stakeholders of those futures or ancestors of those futures. So if it is a matter of legacy, it's not just my legacy or your legacy or our legacy as futurists or policymakers or experts, it's everybody's legacy. So how do we make room for everyone on this planet, but also for them to come in with their own worldviews, with their own epistemologies and ways of looking at the world? You hinted on the Anthropocene. I truly believe that we need to get more committed to thinking about this in a non-anthropocentric way. We need to change the narrative of what is our place in the natural world. And this is not about reinventing the wheel. So every time somebody talks about the new anything or the new normal, first of all, do we really want to go back to the world that was before this crisis? I don't think it was a great world. We are in the middle of an environmental crisis. We're just distracted by this smaller manifestation of that bigger crisis that we're going to continue to face for generations. So, and then the second thing is, it isn't just about a new something, because there are cultures around the world who look at the world in a very relational way, who understand that this planet is not just meant for exploitatively extracting from, that they don't see the natural world as only resources. They are our co-inhabitants of this world. And how do we bring those sensibilities and really learn from people who know how to live like that? There's a lot of benefit in it. And I think now is the time to get serious, walk that talk.
I love it. I love it. Guys, we have so many questions, but we're literally down to the wire time-wise. What I've suggested is that the panelists may want to put in a word or two where they can answer in text. But what I have done is I've copied these questions, and I'm going to suggest, Pupul and Rial, if you don't mind, that we're going to abuse our LinkedIn accounts and maybe try to respond to some of them online. But I mean, I think we're ending up at an amazing place where we're saying, so in a way, maybe the future is about now. And understanding some of these points. How do we think about the future, and why do we think about our future? How we understand our agency in the future. If we had time, I was keen to see what both of you thought about that, the whole, you know, post-humanist kind of discourse, and whether that's a space of comfort or fear, greater fear now, and what kind of the reactions to that might be. We won't have time for that conversation, but I think what's coming out of this is our processes, our ways of thinking. These ideas of futures literacy, of decolonization, perhaps really give us an alternative approach to thinking about a futurist's reaction now, beyond the idea of new scenarios and a new set of future visions and snapback ideas. And then for me, that's really comforting. I suppose one could accuse me of having chosen people who shared my own concerns and ideas, but there's lots of chat going on in the chat session as well, saying good conversation is the conversation we need to be having. I don't know if any of you want to say anything. We've really just got a minute, but do you want to say anything on any of the questions that have come up in particular, or are you happy to take them all offline? A quick minute from both of you.
I can just quickly respond to what Sally said about the comment I made about it being a collective journey. And she asked, this conversation is about values and not destinations. Absolutely. It is about values. I mean, even just what we've learned about what is essential work, what is non-essential work. We have to challenge how we see the world, and thinking about the future is not always about building the story of the future we want, but also reevaluating the values as well as narratives that we're carrying with ourselves up until this point that don't serve us anymore, and then letting go of them. So that evaluation is what futures thinking is for me. Yes.
Cool. Thanks, Pupul. Rial?
Yeah, I would just say that the decolonization, which is so essential, and the storytelling, which is fundamental, is a question of what we use them for. So if we use them for this teleological, I'm going to conquer, I'm going to colonize tomorrow, then it's exactly not giving us the opportunity to think and to see and to also be comfortable, and here's the dancing and the music of changes in the conditions of change. Is that the values that we have don't necessarily mean the values of the future, but can we be open to changes in the conditions of change, which is our own way of being and our own way of living. So thank you, Geci. Absolutely wonderful, as always, to talk with you. Really appreciate it, and Pupul as well. Fantastic to be together. Okay.
Thank you, guys. And I love that the Indian greeting, Namaste, has finally become the globally appropriate greeting. Yeah. Guys, thank you so much. Everybody... no more of this. Great. Thank you, Pupul. Thank you, Rial. Thanks to everybody who joined us for this morning. We'll try and get to some of these questions online, and I guess enjoy the rest of the conference and the rest of your days.